Hi my loves, welcome back or welcome to my channel. Welcome if you guys are new. When I started creating book content, I started creating TikToks first and I would always just do book recommendation videos and I still do. But I realized over on this space, I really don't do many book recommendation videos and a lot of you guys in the comments recently have been asking for some book recommendation videos. So I figured why not start this series with my 6-star reads, my god tier books. Books that I think about on a daily basis, books that remind me why I love reading so much. I have emotional attachments to a lot of these books and that's okay. But I figure why not just share my love for these books with you in a recommendations video. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing here. If you're new to this channel, hi, welcome. It's so great to have you here. I'm not going to do too much rambling before we get into this video, but I will say we kind of have some categories. So we have my fantasy category, which is probably my biggest category of 6-star reads and just god tier books that I like owe everything to. We're also going to be including dystopian in that category. So fantasy and dystopian. Then we have romance. We have my romance category, and then we'll just have kind of like general fiction, contemporary fiction, anything in between. I don't really have any thrillers or mysteries or anything that makes this list. I just don't read as many of them. But yeah, these are kind of my 3 main genres that I read all the time. Yeah, without further ado, let's start with fantasy and dystopian because I feel like that's my favorite one to talk about, honestly. But the first series as a whole that is my 6-star read is the Lord of the Rings series by J.R.R. Tolkien. I feel like this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. This is my favorite fantasy series I have ever read and will always be, I think. It just holds such high ranks. Like, it is just one of the most incredibly detailed, intricate series I have ever read in my life, and it introduced me to high fantasy, and I will forever be grateful for that. I just think Tolkien is an absolute genius, and I love the way he writes and creates characters. It's really unique to him. Personally, I'm obsessed with it. So this is the first series. These are actually special box editions that my father bought for me for Christmas last year, our most recent Christmas. I'll show you them very quickly in case you haven't seen them on my channel before, but this is The Hobbit. I personally love The Hobbit. I think it is such an underrated book, and if you want to start the Lord of the Rings series, I definitely recommend starting with The Hobbit and working your way from there. I just think it gives a really good like backstory to the Lord of the Rings, and it kind of gives you an introduction to the world, to the setting, to the Shire, everything like that, to all the different creatures we've got. We've got hobbits, elves, obviously. I'm sure you all know this. This is the Fellowship of the Ring. These just illustrated versions are everything to me. They are so beautiful. Now, The Two Towers is actually my favorite book in the series. I don't know why. I just absolutely love. Now, for most of these, and this is the last one, I will be giving you a little plot overview and like a little introduction to the world, but I do kind of feel like Lord of the Rings doesn't need an introduction. I hope it doesn't. But I will say, if you haven't read Lord of the Rings and you're a big fantasy reader, maybe you just didn't read it when you were younger and that's why you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. I will say some people either love it, some people might not. Tolkien's writing is very hit or miss for a lot of people, but if you're finding it hard to read, I highly recommend the audiobooks as well. I just think this is a must read, a once in a lifetime must read. I mean, personally, it's a multiple times in my lifetime, but you know. Continuing on in the fantasy genre, my next favorite read is Six of Crows duology by Leigh Bardugo. Now, this is actually part of a bigger universe, a bigger fantasy universe, which I feel like a lot of people don't know, but you actually start off with the Shadow and Bone trilogy, then you go on to the Six of Crows duology, and then you can go on to the King of Scars duology. I think they are all wonderful series. I think reading them as a whole, it introduces you to the Grishaverse. Like, that is the Grishaverse, which is one of my god tier series. So honestly, I would say Six of Crows is as high as it is for me, and is one of my favorite books of all time because of the surrounding series. Reading them in order, getting to know our characters, and then diving into Six of Crows and then going on to King of Scars is the best thing in the entire world. We have overlapping characters, like little cameos of our favorite characters. Politics from the first series is really relevant in the next series. Like, it just, everything fits together so perfectly. An interconnected fantasy series, one of my favorite things in the world. So Six of Crows, if you haven't heard of it, clearly been living under a rock, but don't worry, I will introduce you to it and you will be very thankful for me. As I said, I highly recommend reading the Shadow and Bone trilogy first, but the Six of Crows, we are following 6 characters, obviously, who are trying to undertake a very massive heist. Certain people are called Grishas and they have elemental magic. They may have water magic, fire magic, etc. So that in itself is really interesting. And this is multiple POVs as well. So we get so many different characters' perspectives, which I love. I just connected to these characters in a way that I can't explain. It was wonderful. I did read this when I was a teenager. So I read this whole series when I was a teenager. And I think it may have hit a little bit different because of that. Because something about reading things when you're a teenager, I think just the minimal minimal distractions, not comparing it. I wasn't on social media. I wasn't comparing it to everyone else's like thoughts on it. And I could just have my own little moment with the series. And I'm very, very thankful for that, honestly. Same with Lord of the Rings. This is also one of my favorite found families I have ever read about in any book. So yeah, I highly recommend it. The next trilogy I recently finished, and you guys probably know this as well. So that is the Miss Bond series by Brandon Sanderson. This is the traditional trilogy. There are add-ons to this series, like set in the same world, but they're based around the same characters. But the traditional trilogy to me is one of the best things I have ever read. Brandon Sanderson has this way of writing that just is so intricate. Every single little tiny plot point is relevant later on. Like, you have to know what you're reading. You have to be aware, you have to know our characters. And speaking of characters, again, some of the best characters I have ever read. Also, the books just keep getting better. Final Empire, the first one was great. Well of Ascension, even better. And then Hero of Ages has got to be one of the best books I have ever read. My jaw was on the floor so many times. I know that Brandon Sanderson is a bit intimidating because yes, look at the size of these books. But when I tell you it is so worth it, the audiobooks for these are also incredible. I kind of did a mix of both. And when I wasn't understanding or I couldn't like switch my brain on to like fully immerse myself in these books, I would listen to the audiobook whilst reading. That was also a really good technique. If you don't know what the Miss Bond series is about, we are set in a world where the bad guy has already won. Been a battle, and instead of the good guys winning like it usually does, the bad guy has won. So he is known as the Lord Ruler, and he pretty much rules over this entire realm, very oppressed society. And within this society, there are people called Mistborn. They are very rare, but they have incredibly strong magical powers, and magic in this world is drawn from particular metals. So for example, I've got a little diagram thing in the back. Iron gives you extreme human strength. From brass, you can get mental attributes. Like, it's really, really fascinating. It's unlike anything I've ever read before, and I'm so excited to continue. I haven't read The Way of Kings, by the way, that entire series. If I had, I'm sure that would have been on this list, but I am still making my way through that. But yes, this series, highly, highly recommend. I feel there is an ongoing theme with my fantasy worlds, and that is that I love an interconnected series. I love a lengthy fantasy series, and especially when they're separated into different series, but technically could be considered the one series. My favorite thing ever. This is demonstrated very, very obviously in the next series, which is the Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy. This series literally feels like a magical dream. It is so mystical and whimsical. I cannot explain it, but Stephanie Garber's writing is insane. I have read this multiple times, annotated it like crazy. Specifically, The Ballad of Never After, the second book in this trilogy, one of my favorite books I have ever read. Just the characters in this are so incredible. And I say this is technically interconnected because it is recommended that you read the Caraval trilogy before you go into this. Now, you don't have to, but I would recommend it. I would definitely say, like, it introduces you to a few of our characters, it introduces you to the world, and then going on from that into this series it's just wonderful. If you don't know, Once Upon a Broken Heart, oh my gosh, it makes me so happy thinking about it. Once Upon a Broken Heart. I'll bring this one up because this is the first one. I know, I'm aware that they don't match. It annoys me, but not enough to go and find the physical copy for this. Anyway, we're following Evangeline Fox, whose love of her life has just been engaged to her sister. She thinks he's been tricked into this or something, and she is certain that he would never do this willingly. So she calls upon Jax, who is the Prince of Hearts and kind of just very known not to trust. He is a trickster, he is witty, everything like that. She calls upon him because she doesn't want her heart to be broken, and she says, can you stop this wedding? He does, in return for 3 kisses whenever he wants, wherever he wants, whenever in time, basically. So yeah, Evangeline and Jax make a deal, and it goes from there. It really, really escalates from there, I will say. And as I just said, this world feels like an absolute dream. It is so mystical and magical. So I will say, if you've read the first book and you didn't quite click with it, I do highly recommend going on to the second book, because the second book really just, it takes it to a whole new level, and this series as a whole is a 6-star series for me. We have 2 more series in this category. I have realized as well that they're all series. Very aware of that. The second last series is the Hunger Games trilogy. The Hunger Games series at this point, because Sunrise on the Reaping and Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes are 2 of my favorite books as well. Just gonna talk about it as a whole though. Obviously, this is like a childhood favorite for me. I am currently rereading this series and it is hitting even harder. Suzanne Collins is an absolute mastermind. Her writing is insane. The integration of politics in this in real life scenarios is insane. The characters, everything. I feel like I won't ramble on about this one too much, but just letting you know, this will forever be one of my favorite series I have ever read. I read it for the first time when I was like 13, and I don't think I quite understood the politics and meaning behind a lot of the things. I did love our characters, and that's why I loved it at 13, but now I love it because of the characters and because of the entire plot and the entire setting and politics and deeper meanings to this series. I just think it is an absolute masterpiece. And one of the things that amazes me is you can read it at 13 and love it, and then read it in like your 20s and love it even more. Suzanne Collins never misses, and Sunrise on the Reaping is like my top read of the year so far, hands down, like easiest thing to ever say. The last fantasy series in this category is the Darkest Shade of Magic trilogy by V.E. Schwab. Now, I read this book with such little expectations. I didn't think I would love it as much as I did, but when I tell you, this trilogy just ate me up. Once I was in this world, I could not let go. V.E. Schwab's writing in this is absolutely wonderful. I loved the setting of it. I absolutely loved the setting of it. Basically, we are set in London and we're following our main protagonist, Kel, who is a traveler or a magician. He's one of very, very few. And basically, these magicians can travel between the different realities of London that there are in this world. So we have the grey London, the black London, the red London, and the white London. It is so, so wonderful. There is a little line of romance, very little, but I love it. Our characters are just absolutely incredible. Again, the politics behind this is wonderful. It just felt so unique. I just haven't read a book like this before or a series like this before, and the series just kept getting better. The third book is my favorite in the entire series, and I just don't think this series gets enough hype. I don't understand why more people aren't obsessed with it. So if you are obsessed with it, that's great, thank you. You're just like me. Now that was the biggest category of all my reads. From here on, we don't have too many more, but we are changing categories. We are gonna go into the romance category. I think I only have 3 books in this, or 3 series. We're gonna go into the romance category. The first one I feel like is very obvious. And if you have noticed my jumper and you've read the series, you will understand. It says MP and BJ. And if that doesn't give you a hint, the entire Magnolia Parks universe by Jessa Hastings. Now, this is not my typical book. This is not my typical love. This is a very toxic, drama-filled environment, and I loved every second of it. I really didn't think I would, but I absolutely did. Magnolia Parks is often described as Gossip Girl, but set in London around like London socialites. And I feel like that is the best way to describe it. However, I just feel like we have a lot deeper meaning than Gossip Girl. Our characters have a lot more depth to them. They're not as shallow, if you will. Obviously, Chuck and Blair, not shallow at all, but like we just have so much emotional depth to this story, and I absolutely loved it because of that. I cannot get enough of our characters. I am absolutely obsessed with them. And something about this series as well, we have 3 Magnolia and BJ books. So Magnolia Parks, The Long Way Home, and then Magnolia Parks Into the Dark, which is my favorite book. I have like one of my favorite books ever. And then we also have Daisy Hates books. So Daisy Hates and then Daisy Hates The Great Undoing. Hopefully we're going to be getting another book in her series somewhat soon. They're all interconnected, and I do recommend you read them in order. But this is one of my favorite series I have ever read. Just the characters in this are so toxic and flawed yet lovable. I love every single one of these characters. I connect to every single one of these characters. They are some of the most infuriating characters I have ever read about, but I love them for that reason, if that makes sense. But as I said, obsessed with the world, obsessed with the drama and toxicity, but it also makes so much sense. The first book you'll read and you're like, oh, this wasn't amazing. Don't worry, I was the same. The second book you'll be like, this was a little bit better. By the third book, I was hooked. There was no way I couldn't finish the series, and then they just kept getting better. They just kept getting more depth to them. Why the characters act like they do and are who they are is just something that happens in the later books as well, and things from this book start making so much more sense, or their actions start making so much more sense, and you just start feeling so emotionally connected to them. I can't explain it, but it is truly one of the best reading experiences I have ever had because of that. Obviously, I love it. Yeah. That's it. Speaking of some of the best series I have ever read, I feel like people who are a Magnolia Parks fan are usually this next series as well. This series has a chokehold on me that I can't explain, and to be honest, I don't even know why. This is a very exciting month for this series as well. We get getting a new book in the series, and that is the Binding 13 Boys of Tommen series. I'm just holding up the first book because the whole series is just there. I love every single one in this series. I love every single book in this series without, like, I cannot explain. Basically, what this book is about, or this series is about, we're set in Ireland, and we're following Johnny, who is a high school rugby player. We're following Shannon, who is just trying to get through her high school years. She has a very, very hard home life and very hard school life, and the connection is unlike anything I have ever read before. I don't know why I am so obsessed with this book. Or this series, I try and explain it. I truly can't. It's just something that gives you all the feels. Like I have bawled my eyes over this series multiple times. And Releasing 10 comes out at the end of this month, and I'm really sad because somebody has gone onto the internet and leaked all the pages and spread them all over TikTok and everything without spoiler warnings. I have managed to avoid them as of this far, but I know so many people haven't, and they have had the entire book spoiled for them. So that sucks, and that is the reason people don't get ARCs anymore, because we're not trusted with them, which sucks, because if you get an early copy of this book, you will literally like, that is such an amazing opportunity. Keep that to yourself. Just saying. Only a few more weeks until everyone else can relate to you about it. Anyway, that's my little rant for that one. I have reread and annotated this book. I don't know if you can really see, but this starts with Binding and Keeping 13. Then we go on to Saving and Redeeming 6, which are on the same timeline as this series, but from different characters' perspectives. And you may be like, oh, that's really boring. It's not. These books are thick, and you will not be bored one single second. You will be completely encompassed in this every single second. I have seen a lot of people say that they just don't want to read this because it's a high school romance. It doesn't feel like a high school romance. It feels so much more. It is so much heavier than that. Please, please look up trigger warnings before you go into this, because there are some seriously sensitive topics, and this series is full of heartbreak. It is full of heartbreak for our characters. If you're not ready for that emotional toll, just avoid it, honestly, because it seriously takes an insane toll on you. But still, obviously one of my favorite series of all time. Now, this last romance book, I would just say it's a 5-star read, and I highly recommend it. I just never would have thought this book would have been as high rated as it is for me. And that is Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. I don't know why I loved this book so much. I think the way Abby Jimenez writes is incredible. I think the way she incorporates flaws into her characters that we can see ourselves in is incredible. I think more characters need to have these elements to them, like real life elements that people deal with on a daily basis, and you can see yourself in these characters. And Abby Jimenez has a way of doing that in all of her books, honestly, that I really truly love. We are following Brianna and Jacob, who both work in the hospital, and they kind of get off to a really rough start, but then they start communicating to each other through letters because that's the best way for them to talk. And I don't even want to say too much. I feel like going into this blind is the best thing, and I won't talk about this too much because it is, at the end of the day, just a little romance book, but it is one of the best little romance books I have ever read. These are interconnected standalones, so you can start with Part of Your World, then go on to Yours Truly, and then Just for the Summer. The perfect romance series, I guess. It's not a series, interconnected standalones. Okay, now we're gonna go into contemporary fiction, which is our last category. I told you I didn't have many romances, and I don't have that many contemporary fictions, but one of the best contemporary fictions I have ever read, and this borders on romance, but it's okay, is Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. She is one of my favorite authors. I absolutely love her. I just connect to her writing so much, and this was one of the first books I read by her, if not the first one, and it truly just changed me. I loved this book so much. I know that it's either a love or a hate, but for me, it will always be a love. If you haven't read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, we are following Monique, who is interviewing the infamous Evelyn Hugo, who has had a life in Hollywood during the 70s and 80s. And through that life, she has had 7 husbands. And we kind of see her life story through these 7 husbands. Like, they're kind of stages of her life, I would say. It is so wonderfully written. I have cried my eyes out. I would love to reread this at some point and just see if it hits the same. This is also what kind of just made me want to read more contemporary fiction and possibly branch out my reading a little bit more, because I did pretty much read exclusively fantasy. But I also just think this explored some really prevalent issues. This is the last book to the entire video, and I have kept this for last for a reason, because do not take this as a recommendation. Please go into this at your own risk, and please look up trigger warnings before you go into this. It's a little life. Clearly this book destroyed me. It is one of the most emotional books, if not the most emotional book I have ever read. Go in knowing that this is a very slow moving book. We're basically following 4 graduates who have moved to New York and are all just leading very different lives. They're all dealing with really intense problems and seeing how that impacts their life. These are also all very prevalent problems that a lot of people do deal with. Reading it in such like a confrontational way, almost. Like, the author really just says it as it is. She just says it as it is, and it's sometimes really hard to read because of that, but it is also one of the most incredibly touching and moving books I have ever read, and I don't think I've ever cried as much in a book, maybe Sunrise on the Reaping, but I don't think I've cried as much in a book as I did at the end of this one. Took me a long time to cry. I didn't cry, I don't reckon, until there, and yet then I just started bawling my eyes out. So yeah, this also took me a long time to read. I read it over like 2 months, just like picking up a little bit now and then, because it is one of those books that is so heavy that you can't read it all. Well, actually no, that's not true, you can. But I personally couldn't go into this knowing all that, but it truly is one of the best books I've ever read. It's one of the most impactful books I've ever read. Because of that, it's making this list. But yeah, that is the last book on my God tier 6-star read list at the moment. Hopefully we'll add more books to that. I will say also, I find sometimes I'll read a book, it'll be 5 stars, and then months later I'll move it up to a 6-star because I'm just like, wow, I haven't stopped thinking about that book since I read it. For example, that might be Blood Over Bright Haven. I read that recently, haven't stopped thinking about it, but I only finished that like 2 weeks ago. So I'm still waiting for that to kind of cement into me, but as of now, these are my 6-star reads. These are books that mean absolutely everything to me. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you want more book recommendations like this, even more specific book recommendations like fantasy romances or books that broke me, the saddest books, whatever, you can leave them in the comments. I would love to do some more recommendation videos like this because this is truly like to the core of me. I love recommending books and just chatting about books with you guys. But yeah, anyway, thank you so much for watching today's video. I love you all so much and I can't wait to see you in my next video.